The date is February 23rd, 1945, 4 days into the Battle of Iwo Jima. Sergeant William Chambers of the 3rd Battalion, 25th Marines, crouches behind volcanic rock as machine gun fire screams overhead. His mission is simple on paper: advance 200 yards and secure Hill 362A. But between him and that objective lie 17 Japanese pillboxes, interconnected by 11 miles of underground tunnels carved into solid rock. Chambers signals to his flamethrower operator, a 19-year-old private whose name he can't remember anymore because the kid joined the unit just 3 days ago. The previous flamethrower operator died yesterday, and the one before him the day before that. In one Marine battalion on Iwo Jima, portable flamethrower units are sustaining a casualty rate of 92%. 92%. The average life expectancy of a man carrying that weapon is 4 minutes from the moment he fires. The private moves forward, his M2 flamethrower strapped to his back like twin scuba tanks filled with jellied gasoline. He gets 15 feet before Japanese gunners spot him. The distinctive silhouette, the tanks, the hose, the ignition nozzle makes him a priority target. 3 rifle shots crack out. The private drops. Chambers radios for artillery, for air support, for anything. But 75mm shells bounce off reinforced concrete. Bombs explode on the surface while Japanese soldiers sit safely in caves 40 feet below. The American advance on Iwo Jima has ground to a catastrophic halt. Marines are dying at a rate of 1,000 casualties per day. At this pace, taking the 8-square-mile island will cost 50,000 American lives. 3 miles to the rear, parked near the black sand beaches, sit 8 M4A3 Sherman tanks. But these aren't ordinary tanks. Where the 75mm cannon should protrude, there's something else: a nozzle connected to 290 gallons of napalm pressurized at 300 psi. Each tank can throw flame 150 yards. Each one can burn for 2 full minutes of continuous fire. The Marines call them Zippos. The Japanese have another name for them, roughly translated from intercepted radio chatter: the demons we cannot fight. What Sergeant Chambers doesn't know, what the Japanese commanders dug into Mount Suribachi don't know, is that everything is about to change. To understand why the Battle of Iwo Jima became the bloodiest engagement in Marine Corps history, you have to understand what the Marines were fighting. The island's commander, General Tadamichi Kuribayashi, had spent 8 months turning Iwo Jima into the most sophisticated fortress in military history. His 22,000 defenders dug 11 miles of tunnels connecting over 1,500 fortified positions. Pillboxes were constructed with walls 7 feet thick, reinforced with steel rails from the island's narrow-gauge railway. Cave entrances were designed with multiple chambers and right-angle turns so explosives couldn't penetrate to the inner compartments. Kuribayashi's strategy was brutally simple: no banzai charges, no wasteful suicide attacks. Every Japanese soldier would kill 10 Americans before dying. They would make the United States pay such a horrific price for Iwo Jima that America would negotiate peace rather than invade the Japanese mainland. The Marines tried everything. Naval bombardment before the invasion fired 22,000 shells at the island, the most concentrated pre-assault barrage in the Pacific War. The shells pulverized the surface, but barely touched the underground fortress. On February 19, 1945, when the first wave of Marines landed, they walked into a killing field. Japanese gunners waited until 9,000 Marines were ashore, then opened fire from concealed positions with interlocking fields of fire. Standard infantry tactics failed completely. Rifle squads couldn't get close enough to throw grenades into cave mouths without being cut down. Artillery and naval gunfire couldn't reach deeply buried positions. Even flamethrowers. the weapon that had proven effective on other islands, became death sentences for the men who carried them. Japanese defenders knew that the flamethrower operator was the most dangerous threat, so they targeted him first, always. The Marine Corps had portable M2 flamethrowers, but they were essentially suicide weapons on Iwo Jima. The operator had to approach within 40 yards to be effective. He carried 72 pounds of equipment on his back, including tanks of pressurized fuel that would explode if hit by a bullet. He moved slowly. He was instantly recognizable, and Japanese machine gunners and snipers had all day to line up their shots from concealed positions. By February 23rd, D+4, the casualty numbers told a grim story. The Marines had suffered 6,191 casualties. The island was only one-third secured. Military statisticians calculated that at the current rate, total American casualties would exceed 30,000, with more than 10,000 dead. The arithmetic was clear and horrifying. General Holland M. Smith, commanding general of Fleet Marine Force Pacific, sent an urgent message to all battalion commanders on February 22nd. Request maximum employment of mechanized flame devices. But there was a problem. The Marines had exactly 8 of these mechanized flamethrowers on the entire island, 8 tanks modified with experimental flame projectors, and they hadn't been used yet because Marine commanders were still skeptical. The conventional wisdom, shared by colonels, generals, and War Department procurement officers, was that mechanized flamethrowers were impractical, too complex, too vulnerable. They'd developed this opinion based on earlier crude prototypes that had limited range and frequently broke down. Most military planners believed that if you wanted to burn out a cave, you sent a man with a backpack flamethrower. That was the way it had always been done. But February 23, 1945, was the day that conventional wisdom died on Iwo Jima, because Sergeant Chambers was about to witness something that would save his life and the lives of thousands of Marines fighting across the island's volcanic hell. 8 months earlier, in May 1944, at Schofield Barracks in Hawaii, a career Army officer named Colonel George F. Unmacht stared at a problem nobody else seemed interested in solving. Unmacht was chief of the Chemical Warfare Service for the Central Pacific area. He had no background in mechanical engineering. He'd never designed a weapon system. He was a logistics officer whose job was coordinating chemical supplies, gas masks, smoke grenades, decontamination equipment. He was exactly the kind of mid-level colonel the War Department expected would shuffle papers for the duration and retire quietly. But Unmacht had read every after-action report from Tarawa, Saipan, and Peleliu. He'd seen the casualty figures, and he'd attended enough briefings to understand that the island-hopping campaign toward Japan was about to get exponentially bloodier. The Japanese were getting better at defensive warfare, deeper bunkers, more sophisticated tunnel networks, more interconnected fortifications. In April 1944, 5 Navy Mark I flamethrowers had arrived in Hawaii. The Navy had tested them and declared them unsuitable due to excessive weight. The Navy's verdict: these experimental flame units were junk. They turned them over to the Army Chemical Warfare Service and forgot about them. Unmacht looked at those rejected flamethrowers differently. He saw raw materials. He started asking questions nobody in the established military procurement chain wanted to hear. What if you didn't make a soldier carry the flamethrower? What if the flamethrower was the tank? His superiors were skeptical. The Army Ordnance Department had tank specialists. Aberdeen Proving Ground had engineers with decades of experience. Why was a chemical warfare service colonel with no mechanical engineering credentials proposing to redesign armored vehicles? But Unmacht had one advantage. He had access to the Navy's CBs, the Naval Construction Battalions. These were the welders, mechanics, and fabricators who had built airstrips, bridges, and harbors across the Pacific. They were improvisers who solved problems with cutting torches and ingenuity rather than procurement forms. In May 1944, Unmacht assembled what he called a top-secret composite unit at Schofield Barracks. He started with just the 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company. Then he got permission to pull 25 men from the 117th Naval Construction Battalion. These Seabees looked at the Army's proposed design for mounting a flamethrower on a tank and concluded it was over-engineered. Too many moving parts, too complex for field maintenance. They recommended reducing the mechanical components from over 100 parts to just 6 primary assemblies. Unmacht listened. The Seabees went to work. Working sunup to sundown, they modified their first M3 Stuart light tank. They christened it Hell's Afire. The test was scheduled for April 15, 1944. When word got out that some colonel nobody had heard of was building experimental flamethrower tanks with Navy mechanics, the response from established armor experts was immediate and dismissive. "That is not how you design a weapons system," a senior ordnance officer told Unmacht. "This is amateur hour." What those experts didn't understand was that Unmacht wasn't designing a weapon for peacetime testing. He was designing a weapon for desperate Marines dying on volcanic islands. The demonstration at Schofield Barracks on April 15, 1944, drew skeptical audiences from the Army, Navy, and Marine Corps. Senior officers arrived expecting to see another boondoggle, some well-intentioned but impractical contraption that would waste everyone's time. The Seabees rolled out their converted M3A1 Stuart light tank. They called it Satan. Where the turret's 37mm main gun should have been, there was now a flamethrower nozzle connected to an internal fuel tank system. The modification looked crude: welded seams, exposed pipes, a mechanical ignition system operated by the tank commander. A Marine colonel examined the tank and frowned. "The turret only traverses a 180 degrees. That's a fatal limitation." "Yes, sir," said Machinist's Mate First Class A.A. Rika, one of the lead CB fabricators. "But we can fix that in the next version." "How much did this cost?" an Army procurement officer asked. "About $20,000 per tank, sir," Unmacht replied. The officer made a note. "That's expensive for an unproven field modification." The test began. The Satan rolled toward a concrete mock-up of a Japanese pillbox. 7-foot-thick walls, reinforced with steel, designed to withstand artillery. The tank stopped 100 feet away. The commander triggered the flame projector. A jet of burning napalm erupted from the nozzle. The flame was pressurized at 300 psi, far more pressure than a man-portable flamethrower could achieve. The stream of fire arced through the air and hit the pillbox entrance. The flame didn't just splash against the opening, it penetrated deep inside, wrapping around corners, filling the interior chambers. The demonstration lasted 7 seconds. When the flame stopped, the pillbox's interior was an inferno. The concrete walls were intact, but anything living inside would have been incinerated. Then the Seabees ran a second test. They aimed the Satan at a simulated cave entrance set into a hillside. The flame penetrated 40 feet into the cave system, consuming oxygen, creating carbon monoxide, raising internal temperatures above 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. The Marine officers looked at each other. This wasn't just another weapon. This was a solution to the tactical nightmare they'd been facing for 2 years in the Pacific. But the Army Ordnance Department wasn't convinced. "The mechanical complexity concerns us," one major stated. "Field maintenance will be impossible. These tanks will break down in combat conditions." Colonel Unmacht responded, "The Seabees simplified the design down to 6 major components. Any tank mechanic can maintain them." "What about ammunition load?" another officer challenged. "You've removed the main gun. These tanks are defenseless." They retained the bow machine gun and the coaxial .30 caliber, and they'll operate with standard gun tanks providing security, Unmacht said. The arguments continued for an hour. The verdict was mixed. The Marine Corps was interested. The Army was non-committal. The Navy, which had rejected these flamethrowers as unsuitable, now wanted Unmacht to produce 24 modified tanks for the upcoming Marianas operation. Unmacht and his Seabees went back to work. By June 1944, they had 24 Satan tanks ready for combat at Saipan and Tinian. The results would prove even more devastating than the demonstration suggested. The after-action reports from Saipan in June 1944 changed everything. The Satan flamethrower tanks had been divided between the 2nd and 4th Marine Divisions. At Saipan, Japanese defenders fought from cave complexes carved into cliffs. Standard tactics called for demolition teams to approach caves under covering fire, place satchel charges, and hope to collapse the entrance. This method was slow, dangerous, and often ineffective. The Japanese simply dug alternate exits. The Satan tanks rolled up to cave entrances and fired. The pressurized napalm streams penetrated deep into cave systems, killing defenders who were invisible to conventional weapons. More importantly, the tanks kept their crews alive. Tank crews didn't suffer 92% casualties. They suffered manageable losses, damage from mines, occasional anti-tank fire, but nothing like the slaughter of portable flamethrower operators. By July 1944, operational reports from Marine commanders flooded into the War Department. Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith sent a memo directly to the Joint Chiefs. The mechanized flame devices employed at Saipan and Tinian proved to be the most valuable weapon for reducing fortified positions. Urgently request expanded production for future operations. Colonel Unmacht's phone rang constantly. Division commanders wanted flame tanks. Corps commanders wanted flame tanks. Fleet Marine Force wanted 54 mechanized flamethrowers, 9 for each Marine division. But Unmacht faced a new problem. He didn't have enough tanks to convert. The Satan was based on the M3 Stuart light tank, which was being phased out. He needed M4 Sherman medium tanks, bigger, more heavily armored, with room for larger fuel tanks that could deliver longer flame bursts. In September 1944, Unmacht requested 56 additional Seabees. He got them. He also got more men from the Army's 43rd Chemical Laboratory Company and the 81st Ordnance Battalion. His composite unit at Schofield Barracks grew to over 150 men, working around the clock. The mission for Operation Detachment, the invasion of Iwo Jima, required something better than the Satan. Unmacht's team had located 8 M4A3 Sherman medium tanks. The Seabees set to work creating an entirely new design, combining the best elements from 3 different flame projector systems: the Canadian Ronson, the Navy Mark I, and components from the rejected Navy units. 2 Seabee mechanics, machinist's mate first class A.A. Reika and electrician's mate second class Joseph Kissel, led the engineering work. They created what they called the CBH-1 flamethrower system. Installing one required 150 pounds of welding rod and 100 electrical connections. Each conversion cost between $20,000 and $25,000, roughly $360,000 in today's dollars. When they were finished, the CBH-1 could throw flame 150 yards with a 270-degree turret traverse. Each tank carried 290 gallons of napalm. At full pressure, they could burn continuously for 2 minutes, an eternity in combat. On January 22, 1945, Unmacht presented the 8 modified Sherman flame tanks to Marine Corps procurement officers. The room erupted. "These are untested in combat," a procurement colonel objected. "You're proposing we send experimental vehicles into the largest amphibious assault in the Pacific War?" "The Satan proved effective at Saipan and Tinian," Unmacht replied. "This is an improved design." The Satan was based on light tanks, another officer countered. You've never tested a flamethrower system on a medium tank chassis. The weight distribution is different. The mechanical stress is different. We've conducted 3 months of testing, Unmach said. The CBH-1 is mechanically sound. What if they break down on the beach at Iwo Jima? What if the fuel tanks rupture under fire? The questions came rapid fire from officers who had built careers on caution and proper procurement procedures. Then Lieutenant General Holland M. Smith entered the room. Smith was the commanding general of Fleet Marine Force Pacific. He'd watched Marines die by the thousands trying to dig Japanese defenders out of caves. He'd read the intelligence estimates for Iwo Jima: 22,000 enemy troops, 11 miles of interconnected tunnels, fortifications deeper and more sophisticated than anything yet encountered. Smith listened to the objections for 5 minutes. Then he cut them off. Gentlemen, Marines are going to die on Iwo Jima. Thousands of them. If Colonel Unmach's flame tanks can save even 100 lives, they're going on that island. We're taking all 8. The room went silent. Smith looked at Unmach. Get them on the transports. They land with the first wave. If you're fascinated by the engineering solutions that saved lives in World War II, you'll love this channel. Hit subscribe and the bell icon. We've got dozens more stories of unconventional heroes who changed warfare. Okay, back to Iwo Jima. February 19th, 1945, D-Day at Iwo Jima. All 8 CBH-1 Sherman flame tanks landed on the black volcanic sand beaches, but the Marine commanders held them in reserve for the first 2 days. The conventional wisdom, even among officers who'd approved their use, was that flame tanks were specialized equipment to be employed sparingly against particularly difficult targets. That conventional wisdom lasted until February 21st. D+2. Corporal Richard Layton of the 5th Tank Battalion climbed into his M4A3 Sherman flame tank. The crew had nicknamed her Co-Ed. The tank commander was a sergeant from Ohio, whose hands shook slightly as he checked the pressure gauges for the CBH-1 system. They'd trained on these modified tanks in Hawaii, but training and combat were different universes. At 0830 hours, Co-Ed received orders to support a stalled infantry advance near the base of Mount Suribachi. A Marine rifle company had been pinned down for 6 hours by fire from 3 interconnected pillboxes. Artillery had failed. Naval gunfire had failed. 2 portable flamethrower operators had been killed trying to approach the positions. Co-Ed rumbled forward, her engine roaring, volcanic ash spewing from her treads. Japanese machine gunners opened fire. Rounds clanged off the Sherman's armor. The bow gunner returned fire with his .30 caliber, suppressing the enemy positions. The tank stopped 120 feet from the first pillbox. The commander sighted through his periscope, adjusted the flame nozzle elevation, and triggered the CBH-1. The effect was instantaneous and apocalyptic. A jet of burning napalm, pressurized at 300 psi, erupted from the Sherman's turret. The flame arced through the air, a stream of liquid fire that punched through the pillbox firing slit and detonated inside the concrete structure. The interior became a hurricane of flame. Japanese defenders who weren't incinerated immediately died from carbon monoxide poisoning or thermal shock. The flame lasted 7 seconds. When it stopped, the pillbox was silent. The Marine riflemen, watching from 50 yards away, sat stunned. They'd never seen anything like it. Co-Ed traversed her turret and engaged the second pillbox. Same result. Then the third. In less than 2 minutes, Co-Ed had eliminated 3 fortified positions that had withstood 6 hours of conventional assault. Word spread across the island within hours. By February 23rd, D+4, every Marine battalion commander was requesting flame tank support. The problem was there were only 8 flame tanks for an island crawling with 30,000 Marines fighting 22,000 Japanese defenders. The 8 CBH-1 Shermans weren't assigned to specific units. Instead, they were pooled and dispatched based on priority requests. Tank crews worked brutal shifts: refuel, rearm, roll back into combat. Some crews conducted 3 or 4 separate fire missions per day. On February 25th, Sergeant Paul Batchelor commanded a flame tank, supporting the 3rd Marine Division's assault on Hill 382. His after-action report documented the tank's effectiveness. Engaged 14 separate cave positions between 0900 and 1700 hours, expended full load of flame fuel, requiring 2 complete refills. Estimated 150 enemy KIA. No friendly casualties during our support operations. Infantry was able to advance 300 yards, which had been impossible for the previous 2 days. The Japanese had no effective counter to the flame tanks. Anti-tank weapons could damage or destroy them, but the CBH-1 Shermans stayed outside the range where shoulder-fired weapons were effective. Japanese soldiers began to fear the distinctive silhouette of the flame tanks, the false gun barrel that disguised the flame nozzle, the heavier armor on some models, the escorts of infantry that accompanied each tank. In intercepted radio transmissions, Japanese commanders referred to the flame tanks as M1 tanks, possibly a mistranslation of Mark I or MH1. One captured diary from a Japanese officer on Iwo Jima contained this entry, dated February 28th. The American fire-breathing machines have appeared at every sector. When they come, our soldiers must choose between burning and surrender. Most choose burning. There is no honor in fleeing from these demons. By the end of February, the flame tanks were consuming between 5,000 and 10,000 gallons of napalm per day. The 5th Tank Battalion reported that flame tanks were the most requested support asset, more than artillery, more than airstrikes, more than conventional gun tanks. The statistics told the story. On Iwo Jima, portable flamethrower operators in 1 Marine battalion suffered 92% casualties. The 8 CBH-1 flame tank crews suffered 0 fatalities, with only minor casualties from mines and occasional anti-tank fire. Marine commanders began holding up infantry assaults until a flame tank was available. This created a new problem. The tanks became a bottleneck. There simply weren't enough of them. Requests for flame tank support exceeded availability by 300%. On March 9, 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Denig, a Marine Corps combat correspondent, filed a report that would be circulated to every division commander in the Pacific. The mechanized flame device has proven to be the single most valuable weapon employed at Iwo Jima. It has enabled the rapid reduction of fortified positions that would otherwise have required days of costly infantry assault. Casualty rates in units supported by flame tanks are approximately 40% lower than units operating without flame support. Urgent recommendation: maximum production and deployment for future operations. The 4th Marine Tank Battalion's official after-action report was even more direct. The flamethrower was probably the most valuable single weapon employed at Iwo Jima. When the battle finally ended on March 26, 1945, the casualty numbers were staggering. Nearly 7,000 Americans killed, over 20,000 wounded. But military statisticians calculated that without the 8 CBH-1 flame tanks, casualties would have been 30 to 40% higher. The flame tanks hadn't prevented the bloodshed. Iwo Jima remained the deadliest battle in Marine Corps history, but they had saved thousands of lives. The story gets even more remarkable. Make sure you're subscribed because next week we're covering the Marine engineer who invented a device that cleared minefields in seconds, and the Pentagon called him crazy. You won't want to miss it. Now, here's what happened after Iwo Jima. In April 1945, with the battle for Iwo Jima barely concluded, the War Department made an unprecedented decision. Under Secretary of War Robert Patterson issued orders giving Colonel Unmach's flame tank production program a AAA procurement priority. the highest rating in the military, shared only with the B-29 bomber program and the Manhattan Project. The message was clear. Flame tanks would be critical for the invasion of mainland Japan. Colonel Unmacht's composite unit at Schofield Barracks, Seabees, chemical warfare service officers, ordnance specialists, went into overdrive production. By August 1945, they had produced 354 flame tanks. 72 were designated for the planned invasion of Kyushu. Military planners estimated these tanks would save 10,000 American lives in the first week alone. Then, on August 15, 1945, Japan surrendered. The invasion never happened. The 354 flame tanks sat in depots. Their CBH-1 and CBH-2 flamethrowers never fired in anger again. The Marine Corps kept the flame tanks in service. In 1950, when North Korea invaded South Korea, 9 flame tanks were assembled from units at Camp Pendleton and Hawaii. They formed a platoon called the Flame Dragons in the 1st Tank Battalion. These 9 tanks, still using the CBH-1 system the Seabees had designed in 1944, landed at Incheon and fought through the Korean War. They were the only American mechanized flame units deployed in Korea. The flame tank concept continued evolving. In Vietnam, the Marine Corps deployed M67 Zippo flame tanks based on the M48 Patton chassis. These used updated versions of the flame projector technology pioneered by Unmacht's Seabees 2 decades earlier. The M67 served until 1974, when it was retired without replacement. The modern United States military has no flamethrower tanks in service. The weapon has been largely superseded by thermobaric rockets and precision munitions. But the legacy endures in unexpected places. Modern flame weapons still use pressurized liquid fuel projection systems, the core technology perfected by those CB mechanics in Hawaii in 1944. The U.S. military's current incendiary devices owe their operational principles to the CBH-1. Colonel George F. Unmacht never sought fame for his role in developing the flame tanks. He wrote one article about the project for military review in 1946, then returned to routine chemical corps assignments. He retired from the Army in 1954 and died in 1970. No major history books mention his name. The 8 CBH-1 Sherman flame tanks that fought on Iwo Jima have been scrapped. Only photographs remain. But in 1965, at a Marine Corps reunion in San Diego, a veteran approached a man in his 70s. The veteran had fought on Iwo Jima as a rifle platoon sergeant. He'd survived the battle with shrapnel wounds and hearing loss. "Are you Colonel Unmacht?" the veteran asked. "I am," Unmacht replied. The veteran shook his hand. "Your flame tank saved my entire platoon on March 3, 1945. We were pinned down by a cave complex near Airfield No. 2. A flame tank showed up and cleared the position in 3 minutes. Because of what you built, sir, I came home. My 3 kids exist because of you." Unmacht didn't know what to say, so he just nodded. Sometimes the heroes who save the most lives are the ones nobody remembers.